Tim, can you hear us? Tim Peltier. All right, well, thank you, Maggie. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, my fish and game friends, and glad you guys were here to join us. My name's Peter Probasco, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. So Maggie, would you do a roll call, please?
Yes. All right. Pete Probasco,
Here.
Andy Couch,
Here.
Gabe Kidder,
Here. Here.
Tim Hale, absent. Bill Gamble,
Here.
Kendra Zamzow, absent. Mike Bowles,
Here.
Marty Van Dies,
Here.
Jim Sykes.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to do what we've done for quite a while, a custom land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are meeting on traditional lands of the Dena'ina and Otna Dene people, and we are grateful for their continued stewardship of the land, fish, and wildlife throughout time immemorial. At this time, we'll do Pledge Allegiance. And so before we get into introductions, two order of businesses that I have. The first is my granddaughter's graduating tonight at the Menard Center, and so I have to leave at 5:30. So I will pass the torch to Andy and ask him to take over when I leave. The other thing is, you will see we have the letter from Comfish and Sportfish, Sam and Colton, and both Andy and I discussed separately with Maggie, and we asked Maggie to send this on to the CC list that Andy signed to our legislatures and the state, and so this letter will be forwarded to him. So you have that as a reference. Any questions on that? Okay, let's go to introductions. We'll start out with the Fish and Wildlife Commission's opening statement, then I'll turn it over to the department. I believe this is our third time that we've met with the Fish and Wildlife Game Division, and the whole purpose is that we were encouraged by the Assembly and the Mayor that we participate and focus not only just on fishery issues, but wildlife. And everybody's familiar with the Fish and Wildlife Commission. We've been putting an extreme effort on the fishery side, and there are issues on the wildlife side, and there's members here that really want to also focus on that and get the information from the state. So I'd like to, again, welcome ADFG. I think we have some ADFG staff online, so when you do introductions, please let us know. So I'll turn it over.
Thank you. For the record, my name's Todd Rinaldi. I'm the Regional Management Coordinator for Division of Wildlife Conservation in Region 4, which is the Central Southwest region based here in Palmer. With me today, I have Garrett Van Dies, who's the Acting Area Biologist, Palmer Area Biologist. We have Tim Peltier, who is online. He is the Regional Supervisor. And we have Manny Eichholz, also online, who is the Assistant Management Coordinator. I'll speak and answer questions at the regional level, and as well as Tim, and I'll also speak to Unit 13, and Garrett's going to give you a summary and an overview of what's been happening in 14A, B, and 16, which is the Palmer Management Area.
Thank you, Todd. Garrett, do you want to?
Yeah, as you said, my name is Garrett Van Dies. I'm, as of today, I'm the acting assistant, or the acting area biologist for the Palmer office, and the Palmer office manages 14A and B and 16A and B.
Thank you. And for clarification, Todd, you'll be dealing with Unit 13?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. At this time, it's our opportunity to turn it over to any audience that would like to participate. We have some online, so Maggie, let's go to online.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and ask Tim to unmute and also introduce himself.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tim Peltier. I'm the Regional Supervisor for Region 4. And our office covers Dillingham, King Salmon, Palmer, and Glen Allen.
Thank you. All right, Marty, if you could unmute yourself. Oh, sorry. All right, Manny, would you unmute yourself and introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Manny Eichholz. I'm the Assistant Regional Management Coordinator for Region 4 out of the Palmer office.
Thank you. Michelle?
Hi, good afternoon. Michelle Hune. I am the secretary for the Matt Valley Fish and Game Advisory Committee, and happy to be listening in with you folks today.
Thank you. Benjamin?
Benjamin Americas. I'm a fish biologist for Chicken Village. We're interested in submitting some Board of Game proposals in the future, and just be listening to this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. And Michelle, for clarification, you're representing an advisory committee, is that correct?
I am not. I am just a secretary on the advisory committee. I am just representing myself today.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Todd, I'd like to turn it over to you and see if you would like to start out with any highlights and go from there.
Yeah, I guess I'll just take a moment to speak a little bit about things that are going on throughout the region. Obviously one of the bigger things that are happening in the region is that the Nelchina caribou population is below objective, and there's no hunting currently. And the same with the Matanuska caribou in western Alaska. There is currently no hunting allowed. The Matanuska caribou obviously have been the subject of predation control, which has occurred over the last 2 springs. We removed a number of bears and wolves, and we saw some pretty profound results on the calf survival and calf to cow ratios. It was pretty significant. We're currently at a pause with predation control. We've been injuncted, and there's a temporary and restraining order from us to continue, but we'll still be moving forth with the legal aspects and the regulatory processes that need to take place in the future. A couple of bigger things. There's a Granite Creek proposed burn that was actually developed when I was the area biologist back in the mid-2015s, I guess. For a variety of reasons, that project that was aimed to not only increase moose habitat, but grouse habitat to some degree, never got off the ground. Recently, we've heard from our Access Defense and our Lands and Refuges folks, who also work with state forestry, and they seem to think that they want to continue to move forward on the Granite Creek fire. The Granite Creek fire is it 150 total, or two seconds of 100? It's about 150 acres. It's away from the road. It's along Granite Creek, obviously in the Moose Range. And we've done a bunch of preliminary work and a bunch of the permitting work back in the day. It just never got ignited. The thought there is that a lot of the vegetation in the Matanuska Valley, especially the core area, has received some pretty high pressure from moose grazing or browsing over the last number of years. We were above abundance for a considerable period of time, and that had a pretty profound effect on the available browse. But we also had some events like the Miller's Reach fire, which is long gone, and its ability to support moose. It's been 25 years, and that forage isn't really available for the moose. So there's a bunch of areas in the valley that provided a high number, produced a lot of moose over the years, and the landscape isn't producing that many moose as it was once. However, we've been able to, as Garrett will get into, we've been able to reduce the moose population here through high harvests as well as some strategic cow hunts, and we've been able to bring the population back down to within objective. And I don't want to steal Garrett's thunder here, but the vegetation in the valley is actually looking really good. This is one of the first winters where everything wasn't obviously hammered by, and there's annual growth that remains on a lot of our browse species from last year. So that's a positive sign that the moose aren't eating themselves out of house and home, and that's good for the vegetation and for future generations. And I'll leave it at that right now. Garrett's going to talk about productivity and some things that may mean for the moose population moving forward. So thank you.
Todd, before we go to Garrett, I heard that on the news about the mulchat and the predator control. Could you just provide a little more detail where we're at and what's the state's strategy?
Yeah, so you mean the strategy up until now or the strategy moving forward? Okay. So the strategy up to now is we've identified through a number of calf mortality studies throughout the 2010s to about 2020, we identified bears as being one of the primary predator on caribou calves. In both groups, we have an eastern group and a western group. Wolves were also identified, golden eagles, black bears, other species were identified. At the time when we presented to the Board of Game originally in 2022, there was a bunch of information that was preliminary, and so some of the other considerations as to having an effect on the decrease of the populations was that there was the presence of brucellosis, but it's not virulent and it's not affecting. The years following our original investigations, we determined that brucellosis is not limiting in the herd. It's present, but it's not virulent, and there's no active infections. So that's not having an effect on the ability of the cows to reproduce and to bear calves. And then the other aspect that was presented at the time, but we've gotten more information on it through research, is that nutrition doesn't seem to be limiting the way it was. Now, their traditional range is, or the their full range is 40,000 square miles. And, obviously the caribou never occupied that whole range at one particular time, but there's a lot of habitat out there. One of the more interesting things that our research staff have discovered is that the cows are actually gaining weight over winter, which is completely counter to everything we know about nutrition and caribou ecology. But it's been supported by a number of years worth of data. And so it's pretty interesting. So there may be some issues on the summer range, but overall, brucellosis or brucella, the virus, and nutrition isn't limiting. So the Board of Game took action in 2022 and wanted us to go out there and remove all the predators on the western calving grounds, which is a pretty small area. The first year we did it in 2023, it was 1,500 square miles. But that was mostly in part because we didn't know what the caribou were going to do. And as it turns out, the area that they were actually calving in was considerably smaller. And in 2024, it was only 500 square miles. And what we've done is we've been able to remove about 180 something bears over the first 2 years, and a couple of wolves here and there. And we immediately saw a pretty profound response in the calf to cow ratio, as well as over summer and potentially over winter survival. We are observing calf to cow ratios that have never been documented in the Western Mulchatna in at least 15, 20 years. But the two numbers, and we'll get another number again this summer, have been the highest that they've been, and higher than the eastern portion where there is no control. So that's a lot of pretty solid data. And not as empirical as it could be, but it's still some pretty good data that suggests that we were having a pretty profound effect in our ability to increase caribou and to get them out of the predator bottleneck that they apparently seem to be in. We got sued by at least one, if not two, and I guess they joined forces. And basically through a variety of lawsuits and a few other things, a temporary restraining order has been placed on the state, primarily because the judge feels like we did not go through due process and provide enough opportunity for the public to weigh in. The most recent Board of Game action was that emergency meeting and the emergency action decision that took place in the end of March. There was notification in that process. However, under an emergency action, you're not required to have a notification, and that became problematic. We did receive over 200 comments on the emergency special action during that Board of Game meeting. And typical controversial Board of Game proposals, we only received like 40, if that. So 5 times greater response and input than we would normally get. Anyways, we decided to move forward on that because the recent judge's verdict and directions were not very clear. And then we started moving ahead, and then she clarified her directions. So that's where we're at right now. So we are not conducting predation control work in Unit 17. We do have 2 different calf mortality projects going on. We're collaring calves in the east for the first time since, probably since I did it in the 10, 15 years ago. And then we're also collaring calves in the west, which we were doing anyways. We're also recording the number of predators that we observe and document on the calving grounds for future reference. So that's kind of where we're at there. We'll continue with summer composition, summer photocensus of the herd of the 2 groups, and we'll continue with our composition capture work in the fall, and that'll give us a good opportunity to look at over summer survival without bear control. But we do feel that we've had an effect. We have removed close to 200 bears, which is far more than we thought. It is pretty clear indication that these bears are coming from greater distances. We have no indications, however, that any of these bears are actually coastal brown bears that we have documented that visit McNeil or Chinitna Bay or silver salmon or Katmai, Brooks Falls. Also, the control area is 150 to 200 miles away from these areas, and there's a lot of salmon streams between where we're removing bears and the coast. So That's kind of it. Any other questions on that? There's some things, obviously, I can't really talk about this year's stuff, and I can't get into the legal stuff, so.
I understand, Todd. So I guess in summary, the ability to carry it on this spring, more control will not happen.
Yeah, there's some legal action that we are taking in the interim, but we're also planning on a Board of Game meeting in the future, and it's very unlikely, the way the court, the expediency in which the court operates, it's very unlikely that we'll get any kind of action or decision in the next couple of weeks. And to be effective with removal, we'd have to really get after it the next couple of weeks. So,
Okay, Gabe? Thank you. Garrett, please.
All right. I was just going to give a rundown of kind of where all of our populations are at here in 14A and B and 16. So we're going to go through a decent bit of info. If you guys have questions, you can feel free to stop me and ask along the way or ask them at the end. So for moose, here in the valley, kind of as Todd was getting at, we've brought our population down to just at the upper end of our objective. Our most recent survey was from 2023, and we counted 6,657 moose, which is just slightly above our objective of 6,000 to 6,500. As he said, some of that habitat that was supporting a whole lot of moose has grown up quite a bit. A lot of the Point McKenzie Ag Project, the Miller's Reach burn, a few others they've grown up past where they can support the amount of moose where they used to be. And so we had some concerns about overpopulation and overgrazing with that. Our population was significantly above objective. We were up to, I think, almost 9,000 moose at one point. But we've brought that down a fair bit. We had a couple of harsher winters, and then along with a number of cow hunts, that population's come back down. One of our metrics for the health and nutrition of a population is our twinning rate. So we conduct twinning surveys every spring where we go and look at the proportion of cows that had calves and look at the proportion of singletons to twins. And during those years of where we were significantly over objective, we were seeing really low twinning rates. And these last couple of years, we've actually seen that increase. Last year, we had the highest twinning rate we've had since 2017. So we expect to see that production increase and see that population probably start to rebound. And with that production, well, that's where we get a lot of our yearling moose, and the yearling moose typically make up a large portion of our harvest. So by increasing our production, we can hopefully also have a higher harvest as well. In 14B, we surveyed that in 2024. Our objective is 2,500 to 2,800 moose. We counted 1,600 moose, so we were significantly below objective out there. There weren't a lot of moose. We've had a number of harsh winters out there, and that population was down. We did have, I think we had a couple of burns out there. There's the Caswell burn that happened a couple of years ago, and we're probably should be getting close to the point where that burn starts being productive for the moose, and we can habitat can start supporting some more. In 16A, we surveyed that in 2023. We estimated there to be around 3,600 moose, which is within our objective of 3,500 to 4,000. But 16A is dealing with the same thing that 16B is dealing with. 16B, we counted in 2022. We had 6,789 moose. That's within our objective of 6,500 to 7,500. But we had a number of really rough winters out there. The winter of 2019, 2020 specifically, I think we had about a 30% die-off in some of our survey areas out there. So that population decreased significantly. Then along with that, we've had an increase in our predator numbers out there. And so we're seeing a pretty high twinning rate out there, which indicates that they have good nutrition, but we're just getting really poor calf survival. So I think our kind of average calf to 100 cow ratio out there was around 10 the last survey, 10 calves per 100 cows. we'd like to see that at 20 plus. So we have an active predator control program going on out there to try to bring those wolf numbers down. For our caribou, we've got two different herds of caribou. One is the Rady Pass herd. It's a pretty low density herd. We don't do any surveys on it. It's harvested, or it's general season harvest, bull only, and it is a pretty low harvest out there. Our other caribou herd is the Western Talkeetnas. We put some collars out there this last year. That herd is managed under a draw hunt, the DC 590 hunt. We put some collars out there. We did a survey. We estimated we had a minimum count of around 450 caribou. And based on that survey and then some of the composition surveys that we did, the composition surveys showed that we had a really low calf to 100 cow ratio. It was 5 calves per 100 cows, which is a lot lower than we would like it. When we were collaring our animals, we were also testing for pregnancy. And the last 2 years, we've collared 24 cows out. Well, we have tested for pregnancy in 24 cows out there, and all 24 of those cows were pregnant. So production at this point is not our issue and why that population is low. For sheep, we've got 3 different sheep populations that we manage. One in the Chugach, one in the Talkeetnas, and then one in the Western Alaska range. The Chugach is managed under a draw hunt. I think it was 2022 was the first year it was changed to a full curl draw from an any ram draw hunt. Sheep statewide are down right now. And that's observed in all segments of the population, whether rams, ewes, lambs, all of them are down. And it's also observed in hunted and non-hunted areas. It's largely a weather issue. We had a number of bad weather events. 2013 was a really bad year that caused a fair amount of die-off. I think we also saw some decrease in 2020 and 2021. And so in the Chugach, we had a minimum count of 482 sheep. That was done in 2023. We're hoping to survey the Chugach again this summer. In the Talkeetnas, we surveyed those last summer in 2024. We didn't get all of our survey areas done, so we don't have a minimum count, but we did survey some areas that hadn't been done since 2015. Some of those areas that are like more at the core of their range actually fared pretty well, while some of the areas more the further extent of their range in 14B had significant declines. A lot of those areas on the further out of the range, they don't quite have the same escape terrain that the core and the like head of Iron Creek, head of Talkeetna, head of Yellow Jacket, those areas have. And so like around Wells Mountain and some of those places, we hardly saw any sheep. Alaska range kind of had a similar situation. We surveyed that in the summer of 2022. The more northwestern portion of the 16B Alaska range had some pretty significant declines, but the south and the western part of it actually fared okay, and some of those areas actually increased. So overall, it appears that all of our sheep populations are stable at a lower density. For our goats, we've got our main population of goats is here in the Chugach, and we've actually been doing some really interesting work out there recently. And they've seemed to have fared a little bit better than the sheep, actually. We had our highest count on record in 2020, and it's come down a little bit since then. These are minimum counts, and they can be kind of variable based on weather and just daylight and conditions out there. So some of the work that we're trying to do with them, we put out 20 collars out there, and we're hoping to do some siteability surveys and some siteability testing where we can go out and we can count our goats, and then we can go back, look at where our collared ones are and see how many of those we might have missed. And so we can get some sort of an idea of the proportion of goats that we're actually counting versus the ones that we're missing. And from that, we might be able to have a higher harvest if it looks like we're missing a lot of goats. Then with that, we're also looking at movement of goats. Kind of traditional knowledge with goat management is that they are very residential. They don't have big movements from area to area, and that they have really slow and low production. And so we're trying to look at all those things. So far, we've already seen some pretty significant movements. One of the questions we had was, is there movement between the 14A goat population and the 14C goat population? So basically across the Knik Glacier. And the day after we collared one of our goats, it crossed over that whole Knik Glacier to the 14C side. So we've already seen that. We've seen one move from Metal Creek all the way over to the other side of Friday Creek. We've had them cross over from one side of Grasshopper to the other side. And then we've actually had 3 of those goats were ended up dying from predation. So we're looking at what is killing these goats as well. This is all really interesting info for us. For our goats, I think we had all but one of the nannies were pregnant as well. And some of those nannies were nannies that already had kids with them. And traditional knowledge with goat management is that they give birth to kids every other year. So we're already seeing some things that kind of buck that trend. We also had a 2-year-old goat that was pregnant. Typically, they don't get pregnant until 4, is what is believed. So we're seeing some fascinating things out there that we're pretty excited about with that one. For bears, we don't conduct any bear surveys, but we don't have any population concerns. Everywhere we're looking, there doesn't seem to be any shortage of them. We'd say that they're probably stable or increasing just based off of the harvest that we're seeing, based off of the average skull size and the percent of females. Those are all indicators of kind of your population level, and they appear to be pretty stable. We get some nuisance bear complaints. Usually those are either livestock owners that have like chickens, goats, things like that, or rural cabin owners that have bears breaking into their cabins. Our wolves, they appear to be increasing. In 14A, we've got a couple of packs that run around. There's a pack up the Knik. There's a pack up Baldy. There's one around Castle Mountain, and then some that are kind of in the Point McKenzie area that hang out around like the mouth of the Susitna. Overall, we don't have a huge wolf issue in 14A. In 14B, we've been seeing an increase. There's a couple of really big packs out there that we've gotten reports from either trappers, hunters, or some of the predator control guys that were going to Unit 13. And they've seen a couple of large packs. We saw a couple of tracks from large packs out there. And so it does appear that those are increasing in 14B. And then in Unit 16 is where we have our intensive management program. Before we turned that on, we did a wolf survey. We estimated there to be around 150 to 180 wolves out there. The first year of the program was in spring of 2024. And in that season, we removed 61 wolves in the program. We were hoping to get at least 100 out of there. But we had a number of issues going on. A lot of those wolves had some pretty significant lice issues where their hides just weren't worth anything. And at the same time, Unit 13 was open area-wide. And so a lot of our pilots preferred to go to Unit 13 because it was a little closer. It was where a lot of them hunted, so they preferred to, remove the wolves and where they moose hunted. And they had better conditions over there that year too. And they didn't have the same lice issue that we were having. Second year, this last year, spring of 2025, we only removed 21 wolves. And that is largely due just to conditions. You guys were here this winter. We just didn't have any snow. So if there's no snow, the pilots can't track. They can't land in a lot of places because there's no snow for them to land when they're on skis. And they just weren't able to get much done out there. We had reports of a number of packs that we thought we had dropped down a fair bit last year, and they were back up to where they started in before 2024. So we're hoping that we can if we can get some good conditions out there, that folks can be effective in removing the wolves there. We have a number of collared cows in Unit 16 that we go out periodically and we check on the calves that they had. So our over summer survival of those calves was poor. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think we had around 60 calves born, and 5 of those made it to December. But then our overwinter survival was actually good. I believe, I got to look at the numbers again, but I think it was either 4 or 5 of those actually survived the rest of the winter, which is a whole lot better than it has been the last number of years. So that was good, but overall, the summer survival is not encouraging. For our small game, we've got a couple of surveys that we do. We do ruffed grouse drumming counts every spring. This year, we've actually heard the highest number of drums that I've heard since I've been working here. We've been hearing a lot of ruffed grouse. So it seems like that their summer survival of all their broods and then their winter survival was good. We're seeing a lot or hearing a lot of them. I haven't been seeing a whole lot of hares. It appears that we're still at the low end of that population cycle. I did talk with someone recently who made a drive out to the Toke area, and kind of in that Toke cutoff area, he said he saw a ridiculous amount. So it appears that they're picking up over there, and they might be increasing here in the next couple of years, I think. And then our fur bearers, we haven't had any reported changes there. It's been pretty status quo. Other thing I was going to go into was just a couple of, we had our board a game this last January. I was just going to highlight a couple of the changes that are going to be happening in our area at least. We had our brown bear season extended from May 31st to June 31st for Unit 14A and B. So that's extending it by a month, and that'll make a big difference. There's a lot of people that are bear baiting out there that they say pretty much all the brown bears come and hit their bait that first week of June, which previously the season was always closed then. So starting next regulatory year, that's going to be open all through the month of June. Wolf trapping season was also extended in 14A. It was extended all the way up to April 30th. And then there was a trapping setback along some specified trails for units 14A and B. Some of the higher use trails, a couple in Hatcher Pass, a couple kind of in like the Matanuska Lakes trail area, and then a couple in Talkeetna, and a few that are on the Palmer Hay Flats. They established a 50-yard trapping setback for those trails, with a few exceptions, like you can trap if it's elevated or submerged beneath water. But the idea is just to limit our conflict with pet owners and dog walkers and other recreators. A couple of the bigger statewide changes that we had, they passed a number of hunter orientation courses. So in the future, all non-resident moose hunters are going to be required to take a quiz, kind of like, is this moose legal quiz. They're going to have to pass it before they can go moose hunting. Then all mountain goat hunters are going to be required to pass a quiz as well. Similar thing, just trying to tell the difference between a nanny and a billy. And then also there's going to be a sheep quiz for judging full curl that'll be required beginning in fall of 2026. For all sheep hunters, all of these quizzes, you're just going to have to take them and pass them once, and then you don't have to do them again in the future. And then they also extended the aircraft spotting restriction for spotting for sheep during the season. They extended it from August 10th to August 1st. So it's now going to be August 1st to September 20th. You cannot use aircraft to spot for sheep. And then they also passed a night vision regulation to where you can now use night vision and infrared devices for hunting fur bearers statewide during trapping seasons. There's a lot of info, but that's all I had for you guys. Let me know if we got some questions. Yeah.
I just had one on the moose survey. Can you explain the difference with the census types used for moose surveys and kind of describe the differences between them, kind of around the costs and accuracy?
Yeah, so our main survey that we prefer to do is called a GSPE. It's a geospatial population estimator. It takes into account a number of things. We break down the entire subunit into a grid. Each of those grid units is, I think it's 1 degree of longitude by 1 degree of latitude, or something along those lines. It's a couple of square miles. And we'll go out and fly a portion of those, and we break down each of those grids into a high density moose population or a low density moose population. We sample a portion of our highs, we sample a portion of our lows, and then we go out and we do a siteability correction factor. So we go out and search at a higher intensity in those grids to try to see how many moose we might have missed. And then that's applied to all of the rest of those grids that we didn't sample. And from that, we can get a estimate from our highs and an estimate for our lows. We try to do those GSPEs in the fall, typically in November or the first week of December. That way we can get composition from that too. So if we can do those before those bulls drop their antlers, we can get bull to calf ratios, or bull to cow ratios, and calf to cow ratios. The other survey that we'll do at times is called a composition survey, where we'll fly just a number of significant areas and try to get count as many moose as we can to get an idea of the composition of it. We don't get an estimate from that, but we can get a composition of our population and get our ratios. So sometimes if we don't have the funding or the time to get a full GSPE done in the fall, we'll fly a quick composition flight, and then we might do a GSPE in the winter. There can be some difficulties with that because there's seasonal shifts in the moose population on where they're moving. And then one of our other surveys that we'll typically do is that twinning flight. And that twinning flight for us, we do it kind of over the hay flats and then up the Knik. It's one of the areas that is fairly open, and it's an area that a lot of moose calve, but it's also an area that we can get in there and see. It's hard to do a survey in the month of May in the middle of an area that's full of leaves, full of trees, and you can't even hardly see an adult moose, let alone a calf. So by doing it in that area, it gives us a good idea of our twinning ratio. And then one other one that is we don't typically do, but some other offices do, is trend counts, where they have set areas that they fly year to year, and from that they can get an index to compare their population from any given year to year. Our GSPEs do give us a estimate of error. So we have, like for 14A, our survey was 6,657 moose, plus or minus 810. So we have confidence intervals for each of these surveys. And then as far as funding goes, the GSPE for us, it's the most expensive one. It typically costs around $30,000 on average to do. And that's paying for 4 to 5 Super Cubs over like 3 to 5 days of flying.
This goes, I guess, to the prescribed burden. The Granite Creek, that's interesting to hear that it's so old and has taken this long to become a reality. Maybe. I was just curious if the department has ever had a planned prescribed burn that has went into effect and had results that could be shown for it.
Yeah, so the issue with this was that there was some land ownership issues and a variety of challenges that kind of just stalled the process. I think it probably stalled in like 2017 or 18 or something like that. New staff, new players, new landowners, adjacent, things like that. Just kind of, not really a perfect storm, but everything kind of came together. And so there's some indication that it might actually come to fruition. The department's also tried to burn a portion of the Alphabet Hills in Unit 13, and we've invested a bunch of money and time quite a few years ago on moose collars to evaluate moose as the burn regenerates. We were unable to initiate that burn due to BLM obstacles. Specifically, there might be a potential bald eagle nest there. So we were not able to do prescribed burn out there. And I think the department, I mean, Tim might be able to speak to this, but I think the department's given up on that effort in that research project. That was a project that Bill Collins actually had started his preliminary work from a few years back. The department does burn the bison range up in Delta and a few other areas, but those are grasslands and those are annual things. They're not as complex as lighting Granite Creek on fire. I have full faith and confidence that if it was ignited, it would go as planned. Can't really speak to the effects of the fire, but the foresters assure me that there would be they basically, there's like a minimum number of shoots that we expect based on different burn conditions and different habitats, and they've confirmed that we should potentially get X number of shoots, which would put us in a really good situation. I'm not that optimistic it's going to happen. There's just a lot of challenges with these things, especially in the summer, especially near the road, especially near cities. There's all sorts of factors that we have to take in consideration. What the department has done a lot of is it's done a lot of fire breaks. It's done some mechanical browse crushing and stuff to regenerate growth that way. But I can't think of and Tim may be able to, Tim online may be able to help with this. I can't think of a place where we've, outside of those bison ranges and stuff, I can't think of a place that we've actively burnt. So,
Yeah, I don't know that Alphabet Hills is completely off the table yet. It seems like we get a different BLM manager in there every so often, and sometimes it's more favorable than others.
yeah, kind of like our state situation. Some of the players change, some of the just opportunities arise.
So I'm interested, how close are you going back to a Tier 2 situation in Unit 16B? I saw something about that, and certainly have been talking to folks, and it sounds like the moose population is maybe dropped even since your last census.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. We've got pretty specific rules set out for our hunts in Unit 16B. And it's based off of our population and our count of surplus bulls. So until we get another survey done, and 16B is at the top of our list for getting done, we're not going to make any changes out there. But we are close to having some changes based off of that previous surplus bull calculation. Going directly to a Tier 2 is not the first step. First, was removing the draw hunts, which has been done. Next, it would be restricting non-resident hunting, and then it would be restricting resident hunting to Tier 2. So we'll see. Based off of this winter that we had, I'm hopeful that we had some pretty good moose survival out there, that they were able to fare well, and we didn't have additional declines. But until we can get a survey done out there, it's hard to say.
So Garrett, I got a couple questions. My first one is for Unit 16, and your predator controls wolves only? Why is that?
So right now, our bear regulations are about as liberal as they can be. There is no closed season on black bears and brown bears out there. We have a bag limit of 5 black bears, 2 brown bears every year. You can hunt over bait in the spring and the fall. And you can harvest black bears the same day that you have been airborne. You can harvest black and brown bears the same day airborne at bait. And even with all of that, the amount of people that are shooting up to 5 black bears, I don't think there's any. And the amount of people that are shooting 2 brown bears, I can probably count on one hand. So with our regulations being as liberal as they already are, I don't believe that having some of those predator control programs for bears would result in all that much more harvest. About the only thing that we could increase would be legalizing sows with cubs, and there's not a lot of people that want to get out there and do that.
Yeah, the reason I asked that question when you were giving us the calf survival, to me, I think that points to a big bear predation, and so
they definitely play a role, and we encourage everyone we can to get out there and do some bear hunting.
So my other question, Garrett, is when you made the comment that the sheep population seemed to be stable, and growing up here and the amount of sheep hunting I've done and still running around, I question that. So help me.
So I would say stable at a low level. It doesn't seem to be continuing to decline. It's way lower than it was in 2008, than it was in the early 2000s, the 90s, the 70s. It is significantly lower than that, but it appears that it is stable at a low level and that we're not continuing to skyrocket down.
Yeah, and over time, even if we just go back like 15 years, as Garrett mentioned before, there was kind of a heavy winter in 2013 that really had an effect on sheep populations. So they were at an upper level, and then they bounced down, and then they kind of stabilized at that lower level for a couple of years, and then there was another event a few years back, and they've bounced down again, and now we're only a couple of years out of the latest weather events, but right now, they're, as you can see in these charts, you can kind of see the points where they've stepped down, stepped down, stepped down. Now, as long as we don't have any significant crazy weather events, we should be okay. And there's usually a little bit of uptake in these populations in the years following that stability. But we've had these weather events over the last 15 years that keep bringing them down. They're stable for a while. And if without weather events, they may start to build back up again.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead, Gabe.
I guess with the SDA program in 16 and 13, have you seen since its implementation an increase or decrease in participation of permit holders?
We have had a large amount of interest and a large amount of people wanting to get permits, but the number of pilots that consistently go out and are effective has not increased. We've got a couple different groups of guys that have done it for a while and are very effective, and we haven't been bringing, well, there hasn't been many new folks who have committed a whole lot of time to it.
And one of the challenges is with these predation control, the public predation control, the SDA programs, they compete with each other. So we've got public SDA in 17, which is pretty far out there, but we also have it in 16, and then we also have it in 13. All for wolves, oftentimes using the same pilots. And so where conditions are good and pelt quality is good, or if, as Garrett mentioned, winter conditions and tracking conditions are better in 13, they're probably going to go to 13, or if 13 is closer to home. So oftentimes one predation control program affects the success or the removal rates of other predation control programs because there's only such a limited number of participants.
I guess on that, has the department ever explored the option of prioritizing a GMU's need for same-day airborne and trying to almost steer the participants in a direction that the department would like to see more wolves taken than another?
Not formally. I mean, we do have the ABs, the area biologists do have these conversations with pilots and members of the public. If someone called the Palmer office and talked to the frontline staff, I don't know. They might encourage someone to go to a particular area because of recent observations or because of snow conditions. Obviously, if we had to categorize our priority of predation control programs, obviously the Mulchatna is really important. Unit 13 is really important, and unfortunately 16 probably falls in a close second to third. We could, if it gets to that point, or we could, one thing that we could do, which the commissioner wouldn't like to do, is we not offer it 1 year to send everyone to another area. So there's things that we could do, but whether or not that's effective or fair,
The problem with that idea is that there's potential that, let's say we want to prioritize 16 this year, so we don't have the other areas open. If we don't have the conditions in 16, then nobody gets to go anywhere. Whereas right now it's, it depends on the conditions. If we get good conditions in 16, I'm sure we'll get a lot more participation.
I'll go to Jim after my one. Todd, your question or your answer sort of at tongue in cheek. We could do a bounty.
What's that?
We could do a bounty.
The last time that was brought up was under the Palin administration. I haven't heard anything about that recently.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about Game Unit 13, and I wasn't aware that it was cut back so badly. I have a place up in 13E. Do the Melchina herd, do they ever make it over there anymore?
There's some animals that hang out in 13E near Cantwell and over in the park, actually. I'm not sure if those animals are meeting up with the larger portions of the migratory portions of the Melchina herd and going east, because south of 13E, we've got 14B, and we actually have the western Talkeetna caribou group, which is very likely a segment and a mixture portion of the Melchina. The animals that far west usually do not migrate to the extent. For a number of years when I was AB, we had over 1,500 animals overwinter, at a minimum 1,500 caribou overwintering in the Yellow Jacket, Iron Creek area. We don't see that anymore, probably because of the decline in overall population there. I really can't specifically say if those animals are migrating with the rest, but it's less likely that they are. The bulk of the herd still sits in the middle of Unit 13 in the summer.
Todd, what do you think the feds are going to do with Unit 13 Melchina caribou this year?
Yeah, so we've had some preliminary conversations. One of the main drivers for that conversation in Unit 13 is ATRIC and OTNA. They're really pushing. They've requested the federal government to do what they call an 804 analysis, which has to do with ANILCA. And it basically, from the federal perspective, it's just going to prioritize who gets dibs on the caribou when they do become available. We've had some preliminary conversations, not necessarily with the feds, but with ATRIC. I guess we have the Subsistence Resource Commissions, which is a subcommittee of a public subcommittee of the Park Service of each specific park that deal with subsistence issues in that area, and we have talked to them about that. So we hope that since we are the managers of the wildlife resources, and we manage and own the wildlife, that they'll that they will follow our lead and follow our advice and guidance on how to allocate and to distribute that harvest. One of the challenges that we're going to have is the state is the tier process and for harvesting caribou. one of the challenges with the tier process, and this will be a challenge for the Mulchatna as well, is that there's a lot of people out of area that have hunted those herds for a very long time. And so they will rank up very high when it comes time to allocate those resources under the state tier system. So like an 18-year-old in Kaliganik is probably not going to outcompete someone that hunted the Mulchatna for 15 years in the 80s and the 90s. So there's going to be some challenges with that. And there'll be those same challenges in Unit 13. So obviously, the state constitution says that we provide these wildlife resources for the benefit of all Alaskans without deference to location or economic situation. And that's going to be one of the challenges in Unit 13 under the state system is allocating those resources and making sure that the federal government will listen to our guidance on males versus females. They've been pretty good about allocation in the past. While we were ramping down harvest as we were watching the herd begin to decline, they were really slow to respond because of their federal subsistence system. They've done some steps that'll make them a little bit more responsive. It doesn't require months of emergency meetings to close a hunt or to change a bag limit, so I'm feeling a little bit better about that. But they, like I said, they were slow to restrict things. They allowed a 2 caribou bag limit for a year, and they were still allowing cows when we absolutely said do not take cows. So those will be things that will be pressuring them. I don't want to say fall in line but that will be pressuring them to fall in line. I can't think of it. To follow our lead. How about that?
So knowing that system, you have the Park Service, but you have BLM. Unit 13 has a lot of that.
Yeah, and the Park Service and the BLM, they're administering the same hunt. They're just different vendors for the hunt administration. And actually, ATRIC is technically a hunt administrator under the Park Service right now, which basically, I take they issue permits. They're not actually administrative. I think they probably do receive reports, but I don't think they're tallying or analyzing. But yeah, BLM, I think, is technically the wildlife permittee, hunt permittee out there. For the feds, much like they're the real estate agent for the feds too.
Okay, other questions? Does Tim want to say anything?
Would you want me to give you a little scoop on Unit 13?
I would.
Unless Tim wanted to say something beforehand.
About all I had to say was thanks for inviting us, and we're happy to participate whenever we can.
Yeah. So we provided you with a bunch of data, a bunch of numbers, kind of easy to look at trends. I wanted to give you guys more charts because they were a little more easy to digest, but we'll just talk a little bit about moose here. The main message in Unit 13 for moose is that we do have some concern about Unit 13 moose abundance, 13A moose abundance. Particularly because we don't have any antlerless hunt opportunities to help control the population and help tweak those ratios out there. So the other areas, 13A is currently, by the numbers, the only area that's that's within objective. All the other areas in Unit 13 are just below objective, population objective. There has been 2 population objective changes in Unit 13 through the Board of Game this past winter, and that was in 13B and in 13C, where the population objective has been lowered to a more reasonable and biologically appropriate and achievable population objective. So even with those new numbers, we're still a little bit under objective in most areas. So the harvest this past year with 24 was higher than the previous 2 years, and that was probably because of the better weather. You know, it was pretty abysmal for a couple of years hunting in the fall. There was also earlier leaf drop last year, so hunting was a bit easier for folks and compared to other hunting the previous years. And the harvest level was pretty average, despite the fact that we're not actually achieving our population objectives in 13B, C, D, and E, and we're referring to those populations as being relatively low, and there's some question and discussion about this. Our area biologist and I believe her perspective on this There was a period where the moose populations in Unit 13 were allowed to get pretty abundant and pretty dense. Some of them were above, most of them were within, but they weren't really corrected. And so what's basically happened is that we've seen a reduction in the population as a result of previous years with overabundance. We know that there's habitat quality issues out there in Unit 13 from work that's been done previously. We might have spoken about that in the past, but typical plants that moose select for and devour, they pass up in areas of Unit 13, and they'll crater down for secondary preferred plants like birches and alders and things like that. And that's probably because the populations were pretty high. The vegetation got hammered, and when the vegetation gets hammered and overbrowsed, the plants do react. The plants do react by emitting secondary compounds, and those compounds affect palatability. They also affect digestibility. So the moose have keyed in on the fact that they may taste good and they may look good, but they're not doing anything for me. And the moose have been able to figure that out. Now, we haven't really been able to follow up on that. And Heidi's done some browse surveys over the, she just did one this year, didn't she? I haven't seen the results of that yet, but I think we're in a pretty good place for some growth. And with the new objectives and stuff, I think it gives us an opportunity to really shoot to get these populations in that high growth phase, which is just under the carrying capacity. And that's really where we want to keep all these populations. And that's why it was such a challenge. And, 14A, we couldn't keep it into that zone. It's in the zone now. So we should see some really good twinning and some productivity in the next couple of years. But that's Heidi's goal too, is we want to get these populations down within that level where they're producing a lot and we're also taking a lot. And that's really the key to sustainability and keeping those populations pumping out animals without hammering the habitat. So questions on moose before I go on?
So Mike Bowles for the record. So I do have a question as far as, I brought this up last week and I won't dive too much into the weeds, but if you can give an opinion or I guess an assessment, if you can't, I understand as well, but community hunts, not cultural, not traditional hunts, but community hunts. Do you see those as being an issue as far as removing too many bulls from an area? I just looking at the numbers last and then the same numbers here, it kind of seems like there's a decline. And conversations I've had with my fellow hunters is there seems to be across the board a concern with community hunters going in, a small group of people going in there and taking out a large amount of moose versus individual hunters taking one moose for the year.
That's a good question, and it's something that we've talked about and tried to evaluate. One of the so the community subsistence hunters for moose, CM 300, those groups, they get a certain number of any bull moose, and each subunit of the entire unit has a certain number of any bulls that can be taken, and that's calculated based on the overwinter and the population work that Heidi does. Once those quotas have reached, once they have reached the quota for those areas, they get shut down and everyone's back to, it's what is it, Spike Fork, 4 brow tine, 50 inches out there. So everyone's back to general hunting rules, and obviously that regulates, the level of harvest. A good portion of yearlings are usually taken there. So the general sense is at this point, we feel that the CSH hunt is sustainable for cows, for moose, but we do need to have an antlerless tool to be able to do what we need to do with those ratios and to keep the population at its most productive point. 13A is actually one of the places that closes down the quickest in that hunt, as you can imagine. 13D, 13E, 13B, sometimes they don't ever close down. And that wasn't the case a few years ago. So if you asked me this question 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said, Maybe they are, maybe it is, but now that we've had some more years and been able to play it out and to see the last few years where they're not even maximizing or optimizing all of the any bull permits, don't know if that's because I don't think it's because they're not encountering bull moose. I just don't think they're getting into 13E or 13D and those more remote areas that aren't typically hunted and have less trails in them. So.
Todd, I think, I have a place on the Tyone River, and I spend, now that I'm retired, I spend most of September there. And my concern that I see, we do see moose. We see by fall time, we see very few calves with cows. And, as far as the bull activity, the number of bulls that I have seen in the past 3 years have decreased. But I'm more concerned about the cows and not having calves.
Yeah, and I unfortunately don't have composition information for 13 at all. And I could provide that information too, but or observations are noted. The other thing is, well, Heidi's kind of in the field mostly this time of year. We're also doing a calf mortality study on Nelchina caribou this spring, so she's going to be pretty tied up. But don't hesitate to reach out directly to her. Or if you guys have follow-ups that I'm unable to answer, like this particular question, you shoot me an email and I'll find an answer and shoot it back at you guys. But our area biologists, aside from very busy times of year like now, are typically available to answer any of your questions.
Go ahead, Mike.
So this is Mike Bowles again. So I guess for a follow-up to the community hunts, you mentioned cows. So the one that's been thought about or discussed, has that been pointed towards the community, that group, as opening that up for that group only or for everybody? So when there's been a lot of bulls pulled, will just individual hunters be able to go in and get cows if that's the direction?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we weren't planning. No, the cows, we just need antlerless hunts to help do some things with the population to maximize growth and to tweak those. And to achieve that maximized growth, we need to tweak some of those ratios potentially if that's the case. But no, we're not talking about doing cow hunts for the CSH. We did have, did we have antlerless, non-resident antlerless? I remember. No. There was an antlerless draw, which most people didn't like because it's antlerless and it's a draw. No one wants to draw for a cow tag out there, but we don't have any of those tools right now. So we'll be seeking out those tools again in future Board of Game cycles. One of the problems is there's been shifts in some of the ACs, and ACs that have supported antlerless hunts for a number of years suddenly, despite the enormous amount of data supporting the need or the justification for antlerless hunts, there's a bunch of 13 ACs that aren't supporting them anymore. And so if we don't get the supporting votes from the ACs, whether it's reauthorization or an introduced Board of Game proposal, that the Board of Game won't even entertain them. So that's where the public holds the coffers to productive wildlife management.
Excuse me, Andy?
Yeah. I'll just add a little bit more to that, Mike. There's only specific ACs that are allowed to vote for specific areas. So that's the issue. Some of the ACs in the Copper Basin, maybe close right there, don't want cow hunts. So there's no cow hunts.
And there's a relationship between intensive management programs and antlerless harvest programs. So the IM program in Unit 13 is to benefit moose. It's not an IM program to benefit caribou, although there may be some additional benefit to caribou by removing bears and wolves. I mean, we're only under SDA, we're only removing wolves. However, there's very liberal bear seasons and bag limits out there in Unit 13 as well. So under an intensive management program where you're removing the predators and you're affecting the population, having antlerless hunts to correct ratios and help the trajectory of that herd is a pretty important management tool that not only wildlife managers, but ranchers and agriculturists have been using for years. So.
Go ahead, Gabe.
One more, I guess, on 16. You guys alluded to a survey that was done of wolves, the most recent being 150 to 180 as far as population. Because I don't know, and I'm curious, what time of year is that survey done? And are there plans to do another survey to see how the SDA over the last couple of years has made any effect, if any?
Yeah, that survey's typically done in February, sometimes March, just when there's good light conditions and typically good snow conditions that we can get out there and see tracks well. And we definitely want to get another wolf survey done after we've finished up conducting IM and removed a lot of those wolves. We'd like to get an idea of where we're at, and we're also in conversations about having some other potential collaring projects to see how those wolves end up repopulating as well.
Okay, Todd, are there other summary highlights or focused on any of our questions?
The situation with Nelchina has kind of remained the same here. We have seen some modest growth. There's some optimism about calf survival. As I mentioned, Heidi and crew are out there right now. They're collaring calves. We've never collared caribou calves in Unit 13 and done a calf mortality. We've done it for moose at least twice that I know of. So this would be a really interesting project. We're pretty excited about it. Overwinter survival seemingly has gotten a little bit better. Obviously, the last couple of winters were a little more mild relative to the previous winters. They really, I'll use that word again. They really got hammered a couple of years ago, especially during migration. They were calving in Unit 11, and yeah, it was kind of a mess for them, unfortunately. So we're optimistic. There were some figures that were flying around like, oh my God, it's going to be 10 plus years before we can have harvest on the Nelchina, and I think that's an ultimate conservative estimate. That was actually not our estimate. That was a previous area biologist that mentioned that number. We're a little more optimistic that we'll be able to offer a bull harvest of some sort sooner than 10 years if things keep going the way that we're going.
So Todd, does that mean a bull harvest before you meet that lower threshold, or you have to meet the lower threshold?
We don't have to meet the lower threshold. Okay. What we would do for subsistence purposes is if we can figure out that we're on a good trajectory and we have a surplus of bulls, we're probably going to try to allocate those to state first, and then we'll see how that goes with the feds. The interesting thing, which I'm sure you guys are aware, everyone that's federally qualified is also a state of Alaska resident, so it's the same people.
Todd, I'm more concerned on, Otna's big push to, much like what happened around Kotzebue, where they make it exclusive federal only hunt on federal lands. That's concerning, particularly the amount of BLM land in Unit 13.
Yeah, and but the most of Unit 11 is Hard Park, so that's going to exclude a lot of people, and not many people are taking an 11 or 12 for that matter. But 13, yeah, there is a lot of BLM land, but relatively, there's very little federal land, so that's why they all hang out on the highway. All the federal hunters wait for them to run across the highway because those corridors, the right-of-ways, and they're federal land. So yes, there's the potential for that, but yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
So I guess I have a question as far as that. So my wife's family's been up here since her grandfather came up in 49, and he helped survey the Denali Highway, and so they've got a cabin up there. And where that cabin is, it's basically on the river where the bridge is, the Susitna. And so there's trails that my father-in-law and his brothers and sister have put in, and they're known trails. People use them. There's concern that BLM or another federal agency may cut those trail systems off. They're established trails, but they've been used by Alaskans for 70 years now. Do you have any knowledge on that discussion?
I'm familiar with the potential issue
Yep.
and the topic there. Oftentimes, you're able to get some easements. The state will challenge for access. Typically, we're most successful when we challenge for access when there's state land on the other side of the federal land.
Yeah.
Like, we started here, we went across federal land to get to state land, like in unit, no, that's private land, but that would be one of the greatest paths forward. But with what happened with the 40 mile and BLM and the damage to the land out there, it's one of the things that we're not land managers. It's not really in our purview, but I guess there's the potential for that. Though, if they limit access is different than limiting hunting too. So one thing is if they just said you couldn't use these trails or close down these trails, I don't think that would fly. That would be a tough push, but closing down hunting in that area may be something that's more in line with what BLM would want to do if they think that the numbers of hunters, if they think they're going to have a situation like what transpired in the 40 mile a few years ago. But no, we haven't been engaged in any conversations. We do have an access shop, a group of folks that specifically work on access defense. They specifically work on access defense issues, hunting access, easements, things like that. So I can touch base with them to see if they've had any conversations about Unit 13 and the Tangle Lakes area and specifically down where you're at. I haven't heard anything, but.
Yeah, Butte Creek area.
Okay, Commission, this is continued opportunity to ask the department questions or we'll continue moving on the agenda. So, Commission members. Go ahead, Gabe.
It's kind of a broad question, I guess, but as far as the Palmer office, and I don't know exactly how it's delegated, but more or less 13, 14, 16, has the department seen the funding that they need? I mean, obviously there's a wish list that's a mile long and it'll, never all be funded, but has the funding been adequate or trending in the same path as it has in the past, or have you guys seen challenges that you've been facing due to lack of funding over the last, let's say, 5-10 years, kind of trending to now?
Yeah, we've been, Division of Wildlife specifically has been pretty flush with funding. We get the Pittman-Robertson dollars, the tax on firearms and ammunition. Interestingly, only about 18-20% of that is actually coming from the hunting community. It's about 80-something% of that Pittman-Robertson is coming from people that don't even engage in hunting anymore. So thank you. So we've been super flush. The Obama years, the original Trump years, and then the Biden years, and now we're back in the Trump years. Everyone's still eating up ammo and firearms left and right. Now, there's been a bunch of developments in Washington over the last couple of months that raise questions about future funding, allocation of Pittman-Robertson money, a bunch of those questions. And then obviously the governor just put out an edict last week that says no out-of-state travel. It said something about not spending money, but I haven't heard any follow-up on the not spending money part. But he also put a kibosh on hiring. And that's really what our limitation has been. We haven't been limited by funding. We've been limited by people. And this is the same conversation that we had last year and the year before here, is we're having recruitment and retention problems. This hiring freeze, we have currently, we have an acting area biologist, but I'm going to have to file a waiver to get that position hired. It's a critical mission, important position. But we also have 3 primary research positions in our region, and they're all vacant. We have a caribou biologist, and we've got the Nelchina and the Mulchatna herds that we're working on, and we don't have a caribou biologist. We have biologists, and we have expertise and things like that, but we don't have that PCN filled. We also have a bear predator biologist, which we were unable to make a hire, so that sits unfilled. I don't think, and then we also have another research position. So it's really been positions and people that have limited our ability to do work. Much of the work that we're doing right now in Unit 17, we've got people from Regions 3 and 5 and 2. Yeah, so we've got people participating from almost every region except for Region 1 down in Southeast. to help us achieve our goals out there. And so now with this new edict, it's going to be even more challenging. I don't know how far reaching it's going to be. I'm assuming we'll get the waiver for the Palmer area biologist position, but I don't think we'll get waivers for the research positions. It would be really easy to make an argument that we need that caribou position. So we might try to pursue that, but yeah, we're challenged with applicant pools. That being said, there's been a huge exodus from federal service, and I know a lot of people that have walked away or taken early retirements, and those people may show up in some of our certs moving forward. So that's a positive effect. And then finally, you may have read that we had the state did a salary study specifically for the Department of Fish and Game. They originally had the results at the 65th percentile last June, and the governor asked them to go back and then analyze it in a couple of different ways. And they went back and analyzed it at the 50th percentile. So at the 65th percentile, which is the industry average for comparing salaries, from what I understand, what the union and other people tell me, most biologist positions, biometrician positions are over 15% underpaid to the public sector or the private sector. Other biologist positions are around 15%. And it's and at the 50% level, it's not much less. But they've done it both ways to compare and contrast. The union wants to push the 65 percentile. That's the industry standard. We don't know where this is going to go. The message was pretty clear. There was a report summary given to a subcommittee the legislature a couple weeks ago, and no decisions were made, but there were a lot of questions asked about how this was going to be interpreted and used and applied, and it's kind of all up in the air, but the facts are there now. It's very clear. Now, can we say that that's the ultimate reason why we're having recruitment and retention problems? No, but that's a pretty big factor. Pension and non-competitive salaries.
So Todd, is this a hiring freeze based on, just going back in time when I had to deal with it, and it wasn't, a lot of times it wasn't budget. It was them looking at the number of PCNs and wanting to reduce the number of PCNs.
I have not heard that. I mean, I know that's happened in the past. I don't believe that's not the case for this situation. The state of Alaska is 13 to 16% vacant right now to begin with. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be a good way of getting rid of some PCNs, but these are mission critical PCNs, some of these things. So there's no surgical approach. They just kind of put a kibosh on everything and then revisit it with waivers and things like that. They did give us the okay, and it doesn't really affect wildlife that much, but they did give the department the okay to hire the short-term non-perms and all the seasonals that we would typically hire this year to stock fish camps and other wildlife field camps. So that's a plus. So those folks are going to be brought on to carry out the season. I don't think so. Tim, do you want to add? Or Manny, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Yeah. You know, one thing is that Manny's been working on moose vehicle mitigation issues and wildlife mitigation issues, and it's been pretty challenging. We've talked about that in the past. It's very challenging to get DOT to work with us and to help us to engage in conversations at a time during the planning phase where we can put input on infrastructure and administration of these projects that would be safer for drivers, but also would reduce the number of vehicle and wildlife collisions. And it's been really challenging engaging them. Let's see. Manny, do you want to add anything positive on that end of the work?
Well, as far as positive goes, I did get a request from someone within DOT to participate in the group that's a bit higher up than the folks that haven't been participating, have really been struggling with communication. And so I hope that it's moved up further in DOT and that there is an interest there. And we're just dealing with a few folk that are struggling to really participate. So that's one of the first things I'll be doing when I return to the office tomorrow morning, is reaching out to those folks that want to see this group happen. If they're just as disengaged as the people that we were originally dealing with, then unfortunately I think we'll need to move forward on finding different avenues to mitigate some of these moose vehicle collisions.
Thanks, Benny. And we recognize that, you know, vehicle, person-to-person collisions are the greatest public safety threat on the roads. But, you know, we've had some success. We were able to engage with DOT early in the process. That's how those cables are in the Palmer hay flats right now. You know, that's actually more conducive than guardrails. There's sightability, but that's one of our successes. Now, whether or not that's prevented wildlife collisions, I don't know, but that's a success in the fact that we were able to plan with DOT planners and come up with a solution that not only met their collision needs and their public safety needs, but also allowed for wildlife to use and cross and still be able to function in that area. You know, we've pushed for better sight lines, taken the sinuosity out of roads, increased buffers. And one of the biggest things that we push for, but we don't always successful, is lights and lighting. And that's one, and we've done studies on this, I think, and I could share the studies that we've done. We did 2 different studies here in the Valley, social constructs, there's social implications of moose vehicle collisions, and we've also done a study on moose vehicle collisions and the factors associated with it. And one of the biggest take homes is the lighting. We pushed for lighting on KGB and we didn't get it. Somebody else did and got it. We pushed for we pushed for lighting on the new Glen Highway construction here, and I think the Assembly got that happen, but we were not able to get lighting. Politicians, and they were able to get additional lighting there. So the public seems to want the lighting. The politicians seem to want we all recognize the importance of lighting in Alaska, a very dark place with very large mammals. And just to reiterate that point, we do have the highest, except for maybe this year, we do have the highest moose vehicle collision rates in the world. I think like Nova Scotia comes in second for some weird reason. They're a lot smaller though. So
Todd, if I may, I have to excuse myself. I'll turn it over to Andy. Commission members, we need to look at a possibility of having a summer meeting, but we won't know that until we learn more on the water setback. And I wish everybody a good summer. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks, Andy.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to ask if anybody out in the audience has a question that they'd like to ask the department.
We did have one online. Ben asked, what's the important season for sheep survival? Is lots of snow in spring bad?
Important season is just the overwinter. A late spring is not good. Overall, lots of snow is not the worst thing for them. The worst thing for sheep is those icing events when you get rainfall on top of snow. They rely on wind blowing that snow off of those ridges that they winter on, and when you get an ice layer on top of that, it prevents that snow from blowing off, and it causes them to use a lot more energy to get any food. But a late spring would prevent any kind of new growth, and it would prolong that period of nutritional stress in the winter that they're dealing with too.
And those rain on snow and ice events, they form the perfect conditions for avalanches as well. And so that's a secondary artifact of that type of stuff, adds to the mortality.
So I'm going to ask, does the department, do you have any other comments that you would like to provide us with?
I'm good. I said more than I thought I was going to say.
And I think we've run out of questions here from the members. I don't see anybody else. So we're going to move on here to member comments. And I'll maybe just start down at your end, Jim, if that's good with you.
Sure. I'd like to thank the members of Fish and Game for not only answering our questions, but giving us a very good overview of the questions we did ask in your presentation. And I really do appreciate it. And I think it'll help us out to have a lot better understanding and come back again and see us. Thank you.
Mike, do you have any comments?
Nope. Just to echo what Jim said, thank you very much for your time. And your work is greatly appreciated by all of us. And look forward to the future and see what the numbers do. So, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
The same thing. I want to thank you guys for coming. I think I stop in the department's office there in Palmer occasionally, not as much as I'd like to, and I definitely stay longer than I expected every time. So I appreciate your guys' willingness to share the information, the data. I think one thing that I've wanted to see this meeting create more public interest. I don't know, and we've tossed around a few ideas and would ask, I guess, if the department could at least think of different ideas, maybe even that the Fish and Wildlife Commission can do to create more public interest in this. I think this is a great opportunity for the public to hear the department's side of things, for maybe folks that don't stop in the Palmer office as often as others. And but other than that, I greatly appreciate the comprehensive overview of our area, and thank you guys for your work. Thank you.
One thing that I thought of but didn't get around to asking, I know you guys, the department puts out press releases on different things. Would this meeting be something that you would be willing to put a press release out just to let the public know there's a meeting? And
Yeah, I don't see, the other thing is if you offer pizza, you're probably going to get a lot of people to show up, especially at being dinner time. I'm not speaking on my behalf, but that's usually, food usually sells, right? But no, we could, we have ACs, obviously, Andy, you've been on ACs and stuff. There's another avenue, but it's topical and timely. You don't necessarily get that full overview that you're getting here. So, yeah, we could put more effort into this, and this is two more than we've had the last couple of years, so this is a plus. And there's people online, so.
yeah, so that was, again, kind of getting to what Gabe said. Certainly appreciate that you guys giving the time and doing a really good job on answering our questions and providing information for us to look at ahead of time. I'll just go on. Maggie, do you have anything you wanted to say for a comment?
I just want to thank you all for coming out here and for being so present on email when I was emailing you a bunch, and for everyone for hanging with me when we had a last minute location change. I appreciate it. So thank you.
Marty?
I don't have much of a comment. Just good meeting. I have the advantage, if I have a question, I just call up Garrett, so it helps me.
Bill, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you guys, as everybody else has here also. I'm the politician here. This is definitely not my area of expertise, but in the last little over a year and a half that I've sat on this Fish and Wildlife Commission, I have learned so much more than what I knew before. And it's really nice to have you guys here because I can look at the data and it doesn't make much sense to me, except for the raw numbers, but to have you guys explain what the numbers are and how you got to those numbers and what the problems are and what your plans are to do something about it. This is how I'm learning slowly, but I'm learning. So I really, really appreciate you guys coming here every year and having this meeting with us. So thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to, there's a couple things I want to put in here. I want to mention, I think Ben mentioned with the Chickaloon tribe was interested in doing some game proposals. Anytime the public wants to do proposals, the department is a good place to start. They have lots of information. You can ask the department, would this proposal work biologically? If the answer to that is no, it's going to be a very hard sell to get that proposal passed. But you can ask the department, does this sound like something that you could support from a biological standpoint? And that's usually significant. The department has also helped me at times. I don't usually go ask them too much anymore, but when I first started writing proposals, they helped me a lot. So yeah.
It's pretty simple, but we can help you with the process.
So anyway, I would just mention that. And then you see here, we have the next meeting date, September 25th. But as Pete mentioned, we may be coming back with something with the water body setback when that's referred. And I think that's just going to be a kind of like an emergency meeting call or something like that. So there's that. And then is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Okay. And I don't know, we need a second? Okay, it's moved in second, and you can vote by walking away, I guess is what I would say. So we're adjourned at 5:40.